everyone, welcome to the JDC West 2023 International Business Case presentation sponsored by KPMG. Before we get started today, the JDC West Organizing Committee would like to make a land acknowledgement. The University of Saskatchewan Saskatoon campus is located on Treaty 6 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis. We pay our respect to the First Nations and Métis ancestors of this place and reaffirm our relationship with one another. We pledge ourselves to create a competition that celebrates the diverse cultures and history of this land. Thank you to our judges, Stephanie Ulm, George Marlette, Nick Cochard, Peter Siarkos, and Tyler Willocks. My name is Selena and I will be the academic moderator for this presentation. Competitors will have a maximum of 20 minutes to present. Immediately following the presentation, judges will have a total of 5 minutes to ask the presenters questions. Our academic timekeeper will hold up timing cues throughout the presentation in the back left-hand corner of the room. And during the question period. Judges will indicate their intent to ask a question through raising their hand. I, the presentation moderator, will call on them to ask their question. Once the question period has concluded, the delegates will be escorted to leave the room. No questions or comments will be permitted from the audience at any time. Please ensure that your cell phones are turned to silent and that there's no talking amongst yourselves or signaling to the competitors throughout the presentation. Competitors, whoever's first, you are ready to begin.
First thing you do when you get onto an airplane? For me, it would be probably going on my phone and listening to Spotify, the way that the melody plays in my ear as the plane is taking off. However, nothing really compares to the feeling of listening to the music live. TFA, today you have asked us that key question on how you can transcend the melody that you have brought to your Western Canada consumers into an international market. Good evening, judges. I am May, and today I'm joined with my teammates Angela and Yasmin. Together, we are YAM Consulting, and we are so excited to present to you how TFA can approach your expansion strategy into international markets and outside of Canada. Looking at our overview today, we will dive into some analysis where we'll see that TFA should expand to France through acquiring Agence Lions in France. We also will look into some key issues that comes with this acquisition. On first, how your company can actually manage financially to acquire the company, how to culturally align with that new acquisition, as well as how you can leverage your expertise in the French market. We'll then go into our strategy of pause, play, and fast forward. Lastly, by the end of this presentation, your company will be seeing the impact of expanding to international waters while increasing your firm valuation by $4.75 million. So let's dive into the situational analysis. What is your company doing now? We know that the FAIR agency, also known as TFA, is quickly reaching a saturation point within the Canadian market of live music. You specialize in a booking industry and have been the bridge to close the gap between an artist and their live performances. We also know that due to the pandemic, your company actually has quite limited cash flow. So whatever expansion project we are looking into, we really want to consider the two financial options that your company has presented to us. Lastly, we know that the management team that you have been working on has presented us opportunities to either expand to South Africa or Western Europe, mainly in France. But where we really want to drive your company by the end of this presentation is to really expand your revenue streams outside of Canada while mitigating any uncertainty that comes with COVID barriers. We also want to ensure a successful finance expansion plan to ensure that your company has the resources to pay, whether it be financing year by year or whatever the option is for this successful plan. Lastly, we want to ensure that you are expanding into a suitable country, not only in your corporate cultures, but also consumer taste with music. To do all of this, we really want to take a look at what your company specializes in and what are your key strengths that have drove you to success in Canada. We know that you are one of Canada's most prolific boutique entertainment industries, again, as a booking agent to help artists, whether it be smaller scale or larger scale, to enter into the live performance industry. You have also been specialized with a lot of festivals and venues, so you're very well-rounded with your networks in Canada, and we're looking to expand this outside of Canada as well. Lastly, we know that your current portfolio holds 200 active artists and strong networks across Canada. And this is definitely something you can leverage and bring across the globe to share your melody of your company everywhere else, wherever you expand to. Now let's take a look at the opportunity analysis that your team has presented to us. The two regions that you have presented was South Africa and France. Let's take a look at South Africa first. Your company has proposed to us a joint venture proposal with Zulu Entertainment Inc. We know that the Zulu Entertainment mainly operates in a festival style, and you're looking to collaborate with them to host a festival in February. However, as we continue to research this option that you have presented to us, we really saw that TFA, you'll have to contribute to A-list South African artists, as well as many other acts. However, you are not very familiar with the South African market, so for you to spit out a bunch of artists as well as emerging acts might be a bit difficult in terms of the timeline to have this done by February, since we are standing in January. We also know that the investment cost that we have evaluated is around 2.96 million Canadian dollars. And because South Africa has a CPI of lower than 50, which is the requirement for your first financing option, we know that this limits you to only doing your second financing option. Now let's take a look at France, which is the second option that you presented to us. France, you would be acquiring Agents Lions, which is based in Paris. We also know that this is a company that is very similar in size and operations that you have currently in your operations. We also know that you have experience with working with them in the first place, since your management team, Bird, actually has an existing network with them and have partnered with them a few times to work with some French artists. So this is actually a very good benefit that you've had, since you already have some insights on how their operations work and how that lines up with your company. Lastly, we have valuated this acquisition at around $2.57 to $3.14 million in cost, and there's more options for financing this option than it did with South Africa. I'll pass it off to Angela to go through the alternative matrix.
So now that we have a strong understanding of what exactly is going on with your company and the current opportunities that are presented for you, let's take a look at how we can exactly narrow down our options. And we kind of already have a sense of where we're going here. But specifically, we wanted to take a look at 4 key elements that really are going to help you drive this decision-making process. Firstly, understanding the profitability of what this is going to look like for your agency. Secondly, getting a better understanding of the music market, both in South Africa and within France and the Western European environment. Thirdly, taking a look at the impacts of COVID-19 and how those might impact things. And then fourthly, looking at what this actually proposes as a growth opportunity. In particular, we wanted to take a look at these different elements because it really drives for whether you're able to have a stable and secure option moving forwards, especially given all of the uncertainty that's occurred over the last couple of years. And so firstly, taking a look at the idea of profitability. Within South Africa, if you're going to enter into the festival market, the festival space is an area that is very unstable, and it presents a lot of opportunities for not necessarily making a lot of profit. For example, if we take a look at 2024, because of all of the investments that we're going to have to make, that your agency is going to have to make, it looks to be negative 4.89 million. And even by the time we reach 2027, where you'll have hit the max capacity of 200,000 individuals attending this festival, you will still be in the negatives. Whereas if your agency chooses to go into France, you're going to see a lot more opportunities here to actually redevelop that out. Although it says that, within the 2024, there would be negative profit of 2.16 million. By the time we reach 2027, we're actually going to hit around 2.27 million. Furthermore, a lot of this can be actually subsidized by the loan that you're taking on, and so you're not actually necessarily going to be in the reds within 2024. Secondly, taking a look at the music market and getting a better understanding there. Even if we're comparing both South Africa and France, South Africa has a significantly smaller industry size, and you're not as easily able to enter into a lot of the other neighboring African markets. Whereas within France and Western Europe, a lot of this is integrated because of the European Union, and so the industry size of 5.02 billion is much larger, and a lot of the music tastes align more closely with the artists that are currently under your portfolio. And thirdly, taking a look at things like COVID-19 and other pandemics, because of its location and its connections to the Western developed world, France has a significantly higher vaccinated population compared to South Africa. And so if there's any sort of issues moving forwards because of the pandemic, you're going to be a lot more stable within France. And then finally, taking a look at the overall growth opportunities, while South Africa's festival opportunity does present maybe an opportunity to meet more and introduce more people to your artists, the cost at which it occurs is simply too large. And so because of this, we've chosen to go forwards with France because South Africa has limited long-term profitability and a very small market, which makes it relatively unattractive, especially in these uncertain times where your agency is still looking to rebuild after the pandemic. And so by entering into France, we'll be entering into a stable and strong industry with multiple growth opportunities for the FAIR agency and its long-term expansion policy. And so what does this look like for the FAIR agency moving forwards? We'd like to introduce you to our pause, play, and fast forward, just like any song or playlist. And so by pausing first, we can figure out how we can finance and manage this acquisition. By pressing play, we can take a look at how we can ensure a smooth transient operations with the new employees. And then finally, by fast forwarding and looking at our growth opportunities, we can take a look at how we can make a consolidated brand. And so firstly, in terms of looking at pause and financing. So firstly, we want to understand how we can acquire Lions. And so firstly, the thing to understand here is that the valuation is actually quite variable because there's a lot of different components going into it. Prior to the pandemic, the EBITDA acquisition rate that we were using was around 3.38 to 4.5x, but during the pandemic, it's gone down to 3x to 4x. But revenues have also fluctuated quite a bit. And so this 3.42 million is actually the maximum evaluation that we're expecting to necessarily pay. And so it's potential, there's actually quite a lot of potential for you to pay significantly less. And we can talk a little bit more about that later. But in terms of some of the cost synergies, you'll be able to achieve a total of $1.26 million in cost synergies. And this is because you're going to be able to minimize some of the total employees and consolidate those workforces together. But then secondly, when you're entering into the European market, you no longer have to go through a forward agency and have your commissions taken, 50% of those commissions taken away. And so you're able to achieve significant cost synergies. Secondly, we want to take a look at renegotiating the terms for our loan. So the initial loan proposals were for $5 million, but obviously kind of the amount that we're actually going to need for this acquisition is going to be slightly less. And so we should be able to renegotiate some of the terms to maybe get less money and potentially more favorable terms. And then thirdly, in terms of how this is actually going to benefit both you and your company, it's going to help you enable foreign and international touring capabilities and increase knowledge about the EU in general, both Western and Eastern Europe, for potential future expansion. And this is going to increase the total firm value by $4.75 million. That's just based off of the valuation of the firm plus the synergies. And so in terms of the implementation and what this kind of looks like for you, specifically looking at more of the debt repayment schedule, if we're assuming that you're going to, under the 2.5% interest rate, you're looking at paying back $100,000 in interest annually. And by the end of 2027, the principal will need to be repaid, so $5 million plus any interest. And then the initial terms also stated that you would have an additional 10% of the 5-year profits from France. And after doing an NPV calculation, this looks to be around $3.7 million from the international expansion, which would result in an additional $370,000 paid at maturity. And in terms of the timeline for this looks like, really looking back at our previous relationships with Robert de Kock and getting those talks going. And then secondly, we want to do a lot of due diligence on the firm to ensure that what we're getting is what we're actually paying for, and you guys really want to make sure that this is strong. But if we agree that it is a good thing to move forwards after doing all this due diligence, by mid-2023, you can anticipate finishing this acquisition. Throughout this process, you also want to be renegotiating with the consortium about the debt repayment schedule, and then also starting off those debt repayments by the end of 2024. And a few key performance indicators for us here are really taking a look at kind of the additional revenues that we're going to be earning from this European expansion, as well as any new artists that we're able to bring onto the firm through this. I'll pass it off to Yasmin to talk a little bit more about our play strategy.
Thank you, Angela. And so now looking at play, how can TFA really ensure a smooth acquisition and transition into working together with both agencies? And so our second recommendation really looks into establishing alignment with the employees to really ensure that the agency's goals and vision are aligned for the long-term success. And so first, it's really important to talk about the cost savings because this is one of the main reasons you've decided to acquire AL in the first place. And so as both agencies have reached the maximum artists that they can take on, it's really important to relook at what redundancies can be eliminated to make operations run as smooth as possible in both countries. And then secondly, it's really important to look at the cultural alignment between both firms and really ensure that both employees are really aligned in both offices to ensure that long-term goals are met. And then finally, working together, so really figuring out how the collaborations are going to take place because you have now acquired a pool of artists and talents in France that are really known in Europe. And so how can collaborations such as shows with both artists from Canada and France can look like in Europe to really gain traction and successfully move forward? And in terms of the impact, first, this really looks like the cost savings that Angela touched on earlier, while really maintaining the high levels of employee satisfaction both in France and Canada to ensure smooth operations. And so in terms of the implementation, first looking into restructuring in Saskatoon, as the main restructuring that will be done in France is through termination of the admin staff and relocating some of their tasks to Canada. And so to implement that, first looking into what can be taken on in Saskatoon and also what can be automated for the French operations. And then hiring French legal counsel is really important as termination and labor laws in France are very different and it's actually quite difficult to terminate employees. But for an acquisition, it's a little bit more simple and that's really something that we want to highlight here. And obviously cultural trading those are different countries and in order to work together, they need to understand each other. Finally, building that roadmap of collaboration. So moving forward, what for the next year is looking like in terms of collaboration between artists and agencies need to meet to really start thinking and planning those collaborations. And in terms of the timelines, really important things are once the acquisition is done, really looking at the restructuring to start operations as one firm, and then really thinking of the roadmap creation as this is really the key to move forward with the long-term goals. And in terms of really important KPIs for recommendation, employee satisfaction is important, but also looking at agency commission rate with the new collaborations and new projects that you can take on, but also the number of international bookings for Canadian artists as well as French artists. And now looking at the fast forward, long-term, what can you do to really leverage this acquisition to the next level? And so this really looks like taking on La Fête de la Musique, which is one of the biggest French festivals that is around music and takes place on June 21st every year in Paris. And so really, this is a great way to utilize the agency's current capabilities in terms of festival planning and event management with both artists and enabling the show to bring talents together from both big firms. And we know that Garou is a talent that you have already that's really famous in France. He actually is one of the judges for The Voice in France. So really leveraging that to gain more attention on your show, but also on both artists to really ensure that those roadmaps can really be successful in the future. And so gaining media exposure for artists and presence of the company as a whole. In terms of implementation, this really looks like artist logistics. So who can attend, who is free, and how can we make them fly out? Utilizing the French network to book a venue that will be best for the show as you're looking at 20,000 employees for that, 20,000 attendees for that day at the festival, and then marketing, hiring a French marketing agencies and communicating that creative brief in order to really leverage the success up front of the show, and then figuring out the logistics of the show and its launch. And in terms of implementation, so this is a simplified timeline in terms of the logistics to be figured out in early 2024, with the marketing being launched again in early 2024 into Q2, and then the show again taking place in June 21st of 2024, with some important KPIs being sales, artist satisfaction, and the number of new bookings post the show now that you've really gained a lot of traction. And I'll now pass it on to Angela to walk us through risks and mitigations.
Now that we have a really good understanding of our pause, play, fast forward strategy, any great strategy is always going to have some risks that might occur and crop up. And so firstly, one of the main risks that we're taking a look into is the right to disconnect rules in Europe. And so this would result in employees maybe not being able to work as late hours as they currently do. However, by expanding internationally, you're actually gaining an advantage here because you're able to utilize kind of the difference in time zones to maybe manage things that might otherwise be in the middle of the night. And so this is going to be quite helpful here. Then secondly, another key risk for us is really just the COVID-19 and other illness resulting in more cancellations. However, now that you've actually moved into the French market and you have more leverage there, you're going to be able to move things around in those cases. Next, I'll move on to some of the financials. In terms of this is going to increase the total firm value by 4.79 million. And while the initial ROI on the festival is going to be low, what we're trying to build for your agency is an overall consolidated brand.
So TFA, today you have asked us that key question on how you can approach your expansion strategy. We have led you into the French market where we will implement our strategy of pause, play, and fast forward. We hope that at the end of this presentation, your company has fully transcended the melody into the French market as well. Thank you so much for listening, and we open the floor to any questions.
Judges, you first on attendance in this meeting for 15 seconds. Again, with that, there will be a 5-minute Q&A period at which the 4-minute and 30-second mark, the timekeeper will come on the table. No more questions will be asked from the judges. Those will have 30 seconds to complete. 5-minute mark. I will be the one to moderate the judges as you ask questions, call upon your name, and we will start the question and answer period now.
Sure. A lot of the assumptions underpinning your analysis is using France as a gateway to the rest of Europe. Can you talk through whether you considered any implications from Brexit in terms of those assumptions on the market?
Yeah, for sure. In terms of Brexit for Agil's field, the UK was actually not considered in the valuation of the Western European market. It was actually listed as others with companies like Denmark. And so some of the countries that we took into consideration in the valuation of the industry were Germany, Portugal, Spain, Italy. And so, for example, Brexit, in the sense of right now moving forward, the strategy would not be taken into consideration when thinking of the valuation strategy.
First of all, thank you very much. It's really good. How are you talked a lot about redundancies? There's 1.2 million you expected, I think, or around that range. But in the implementation, could you talk a little bit more about how you were going to do that and the risk you talked about in doing that? It's a big number.
Yeah, for sure. So that's definitely a large number. And so there's a few different things that we want to take into consideration here. So firstly, in terms of consolidating the two firms, in order to minimize some of those impacts, we're looking at reducing 75% of the administrative staff within France. And the reason that we think that you guys will be able to do this is because you already have a lot of that expertise in terms of some of those just HR functions, which is primarily what is comprised of within the administrative abilities. And so by cutting out that 75%, you're looking at around a savings of around $633,000. And then furthermore, by looking at whenever you enter into Europe now, you no longer have to go through a foreign agency. And typically foreign agencies take a 50% or to 65% commission off of your profits. And so you no longer have those anymore. And so in 2022, you did around 753,000 sales in international waters. And so that was kind of what was used in that valuation, but we're expecting that to increase in the future. And so you're actually getting increased cost savings as time goes on.
So you've talked about a lot of different potential cultural considerations as part of your expansion into France, but I'm wondering how you intend to address the language barrier.
Yeah, for sure. So we were definitely looking at maybe hiring translators as well, However, the reason why it's not directly on the implementation is because we know that your management team has already interacted with them and have actually built a lot of contracts with smaller French artists. So with your expertise and your experience in the French market already, we believe that either retraining some of the French staff because you already know the head of the French office and having that hierarchical almost power distance, because we know the French have a 68% index for power distance, really allowing the top managements to pass the message down. So having your experience in the French market already and talking with the head already will allow you to kind of transcend the cultural alignment downwards to the French offices.
Yeah, thanks. Excellent presentation. Just going back to your slide, you mentioned about, actually, I really like that you investigated the labor legislation in France with respect to termination. Just a request for some clarity in that timeline. Were you factoring in, okay, so Q2 to start training Saskatchewan before receiving termination within France, is that correct?
Yes, for sure. So in terms of the restructuring, what it happens before is because we really wanted you to be able to look into what was possible in terms of who can take what workload, but also what can be automated to really ensure that the staff in Canada is not overwhelmed with the France workload as well. And so this is why it happens a little bit earlier and starts early. And then the termination and restructuring happens in Q3 once Canada logistics have been figured out.
Thank you so much.
And that's all the time that we're going to have for questions. Thank you very much, delegates. Side of the room, and then all the spectators may use that direction as well.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the JDC West 2023 International Business Case Presentation.